I'll greet you like I greet my students normally. Sup, dudes? So, last time we talked about the philosophy of philosophy, aka the purpose of philosophy. This time we're talking about the philosophy of purpose. Flipping it. Philosophy of purpose is a more fun topic to talk about than a lot of different philosophies. If you attend my next lecture, you will find that out for yourselves. To recap last time, I talked a lot about my story and how philosophy helped me. To summarize that, basically, I was always very, very smart and often very, very sad. To be a little less condescending about it for those who go through a similar struggle that I went through, I was very, very depressed. And now that leads me right into this time, because there's a very interesting correlation that I found. You would think that the smarter you are, the happier you should be, right? You should be able to figure out what it takes to be happy and make it happen, right? That makes sense. But for some reason, most of the intelligent people that I interact with are usually not that happy. Why? Why is that? Well, to explain it, I'm going to reference a TV show called Community. How many have heard of it? Yeah, I like it. It's pretty funny. The first episode introduces what is arguably the main character, Jeff Winger, as a disgraced former lawyer who has just been disbarred because it turns out that he conned his way into becoming a lawyer and he doesn't actually have a bachelor's degree, which requires him to go to community college to, as quickly and lazily as he possibly can, get a bachelor's degree so he can go back to being a big shot, deceptive lawyer. While he's at community college, he has a friend who is a professor working there, and he tries to get his friend to give him test answers so he can even more lazily get through community college. His friend says, "Well, Jeff, wouldn't that be wrong?" And Jeff replies, and this is my point, "If I can argue long enough, I can make anything right. So either I'm God or truth is relative." Now, there's really two things wrong with what Jeff said there. The first one is that he very blatantly avoided the question. He didn't actually answer the question. The second is he's using a false argument. He's assuming there's only two possible options for being able to argue long enough that something would be right. The other option is that he can argue long enough that something seems right and thus deceive people, which the third option is then, instead of being God or that truth is relative, that maybe he's acting like the devil. So that really illustrates why intelligent people can so often be miserable, because the more intelligent you are, the easier it is to make that argument, to make something sound right. And at a certain point, you'd reach this critical juncture where it's actually more comfortable to pretend that you're right than to admit when you're wrong. If you're not smart enough to be able to make that argument, then when you get proven wrong, then it's just like, I don't have an excuse, yeah, I'm wrong, okay. And then we go on living. But if we deceive ourselves and those around us, we actually damage our brains and actually damage our philosophies. What is purpose? What is my purpose? What is your purpose? One of my favorite movies of all time is Lincoln, starring Daniel Day-Lewis. Who has seen that? Yeah, we watched it together. As much as I possibly could. In Lincoln, we get to see the last few months of President Abraham Lincoln's life. And during this time, he is faced with two huge problems. One is the Civil War. It has been raging for 4 bloody years. The second is the 13th Amendment, which would abolish slavery. At this point in his life, at this point in his presidency, both of these things are coming to a close. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on whose side you're on, Most people support the 13th Amendment under the false belief that it would cause the South to quit the war because, well, if slavery is what they're fighting about, if it was abolished, they would just drop their weapons and be done. And Lincoln conveniently does not, reveal to them how ridiculous that idea is. There comes a point in the movie where the South has sent delegates up to negotiate with Lincoln to try and see if they can find an end to the war. Problem is, they're still a month away from voting on the 13th Amendment. And so these delegates meet with General Grant, who reviews their negotiation strategy and gives them advice and then sends a telegram to Lincoln saying, I believe they've come in earnest. I believe they actually want to secure peace. Lincoln is then faced with this idea. We could end the war this week. This week, we could end the war. His Secretary of State tells him, you could end it this week by promising the end of the 13th Amendment. They would jump at it. His Secretary of State also tells him, Secretary Seward, I believe his name was, you can have the war or the amendment. You cannot have both. And so Lincoln walks around the White House, deliberating, deciding, thinking, talking to all sorts of people. It's the middle of the night, and he's got to send a telegraph to General Grant to tell him either send them to Washington or send them back to Richmond. Finally, he goes to the telegraph office. He has the telegraph officer, there's two of them there. It's actually a pain to send messages over telegraph wire. I don't know if you've ever done it. I've never done it, but it looks very difficult. So it's important to do it right. He gives them his message, which is basically, yeah, send the guys up. We'll talk to him. And he tells the telegraph officer to read it back to him. And the guy does. The guy's played by none other than, what's his name? Yeah. Something Driver. Adam Driver. He's played by Adam Driver. Oh, it's such a memorable. Kylo Ren. There's the connection. He is a Star Wars guy. Yeah. When you see him, it's like, oh wow, he is muscly. He reads the telegraph back to Lincoln, and he says, "Shall I transmit?" Lincoln sits there, thinking, and being the external processor, he starts to think out loud. It's kind of funny. He's so scrawny. He's sitting, and his hat is between his legs, and he's just sitting normal. It's a really funny sight. And he says to these guys, trying to figure out whether or not he wants to send these. He says, "Do you think we choose to be born? Do you think we choose to be born?" What? That's a ridiculous question. That is not at all what we're talking about right now. We're talking about whether or not you're going to end this bloody war. You think we choose to be born? The telegraph officers both reply. What do you think they would say? What would you say? Do you think we choose to be born? No, of course. They both reply, no, of course not. That's ridiculous. He follows it with another question, of course, and he says, do you think we're fitted to the times we're born into? That's a much better question. The first guy, Adam Driver, says to Lincoln, that's why I wanted to remember his name so I could identify him. He says to Lincoln, well, I don't know about me, but you may be, sir, fitted. It's Lincoln. It's frickin' Abraham Lincoln. The other officer, Lincoln asks him, he says, well, what do you think? Because I'm really trying to figure this out. And the other guy says, well, I'm an engineer. I reckon there's machinery, but no one's done the fitting, which causes Lincoln to remember an old engineering book he read that has this principle in it that relates two things that are equal to one thing must be equal to each other. So therefore, if I and he are both human, then we're both human. Therefore, 13th Amendment, never mind, change it. Don't send him up. It's what helps him figure it out. He realizes the purpose of my life is to pass this 13th Amendment, not to end this war. So why do we care so much about purpose? Why is that important to us? Is that important to you? Show of hands. Who finds it important to know their purpose in life? All of us, it seems like. That's not uncommon. Why? Well, what's really interesting is back in the day, wasn't really the main concern back in the 1200s, back before the 1700s, really. The main concern was living, was surviving, because back then, I'll put it to you this way, the amount of work it took, the amount of energy you had to expend in order to do enough work to get energy back so you could eat and then have enough energy to work was about even. You could break even, basically. As a farmer, you would work your butt off to grow food so that you could eat it so you could continue to work your butt off. Yes, it was difficult to survive. That was a challenge. Who here has had more than half of their days where it is a struggle to survive? A quarter? An eighth? 16th? Who here has had more than a week where they've wondered whether or not they'll actually survive? And Joel's been in the military.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Good job. That's not really a concern anymore. We are burdened with prosperity. And I said before the 1700s, it's actually very interesting. If we make a graph, and I promise this won't get too scientific to bore you. This is a graph of the average wealth per person in the world over time. I'm going to make a mark right here, 1700s. It kind of looks like this. And here is today. What happened right around this time were a few very powerful inventions. The cotton gin, modern day capitalism, and the machine lathe. The machine lathe is my argument for why this curve happened, because suddenly, very suddenly, almost overnight, we were able to create machines that would not wear out for years. They didn't need to be remade, they didn't need to be fixed, they didn't need to be replaced. They could keep running and running and running, and they were able to run at a higher level of efficiency because the parts were made to actually fit together. Have you ever had to work with parts that were cheaply made? Ever had to put together maybe a counter or a table or something that you got from Walmart that's very cheap? They don't all fit together, and you don't always have the right parts. That's how things were before the machine lathe. Everything was like that, always. After that, things just worked. And it became very easy for us to get everything we needed. It didn't take very much work. It didn't take very much effort. With a few hours of time, you could create enough wealth to feed yourself for the day. And so now, instead of just trying to feed myself, I actually decided to want other things. People decided to want more. Of course they did. I mean, there's 24 hours in the day. If I only need to use 2 of them to get enough money to eat, well, then I'm going to spend the rest of them getting other stuff that I like. Fast forward to today, our wealth is so great that people working jobs that don't take much skill can afford to have a whole family, mother, father, several kids, and own their own house, maybe even a boat and a pool. It's ridiculous. A house that is 10 times the size of what anyone pre-1700s could hope for, unless they were a lord or a king. It's nuts. We are burdened with prosperity. We are burdened with existential boredom. If we don't have purpose, we're just sitting on our hands. It's like, why am I here? What's the point? This isn't a challenge anymore. Crying to the heavens, why? This is why we care. This is why it matters to us. What is purpose? How would we define purpose? What would we call purpose? Any ideas? Cause? Destiny? Meaning? It kind of comes back to are we fitted to the times we're born into question. If it's destiny, are we born with a purpose that we must accomplish before the day we die? There's arguments for it. I'm not sure that I believe that. I am actually more inclined to the belief that we're born with a certain spectrum of ability, we'll say it's like almost a blank canvas. There's a certain limitation. There's certain colors that can only be used, but it's not a completed picture yet. And as we grow, we develop skills, we develop interests, we develop ideas, and we eventually grow into a purpose. That's my belief, but this is a philosophy class. You're free to believe whatever you want. My job is to give you the ideas and give you the questions and give you the thoughts and for you to construct your own. But there is a very convenient concept for us to talk about. It's a Japanese term that makes looking at purpose really easy, really convenient. It's called ikigai. Ikigai is the combination of four things. Those four things, I'll write them now. What you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. I mean, that last one is still legitimately important. I mean, just because we are burdened with great prosperity, just because it's not that hard to get the wealth we need to survive, doesn't mean that if we don't do anything, we're not still going to die. We still need to get some amount of money. We still need to get paid for something. Ikigai translates, it's a Japanese word, it translates to your reason for being. And the idea is that it's a combination of these four things. Now, what do you think is the usual strategy that people have to get to their ikigai? How do you get there? I'm here, my ikigai is over there. How do I get there?
Go after.
Just get it. Just get it.
Go get it.
What do I want to do? I want to do that. I'm going to go do that.
Right.
I know a lot of musicians who've tried to do that. Their objective is get really good at music, and they get paid a lot of money for being really good at music, right? Well, a lot of them want to get paid a lot of money when they're only, mediocre musicians. They're pretty good. Unfortunately, the world doesn't need any more pretty good musicians. The world needs amazing musicians. So if you can be an amazing musician, absolutely, ikigai, all the way. But until then, tough luck, Charlie. What about making a lot of money? Being a businessman who acquires businesses and rakes in millions of dollars a year and is able to avoid as many taxes as he can so he can keep as much of it as he can. That'll make me happy, right? The problem is that most people figure out that money doesn't really make them happy. That, in fact, money actually just makes it easier to avoid tension. And like we talked about earlier, the smarter you are, the easier it is to avoid the tension of when you're wrong or when you need to make a correction. The same thing happens with money. That's why the children of the super rich are often brats. It just tends to happen that way because they're able to avoid the tension of growth. So money's not going to make us happy. And we can't just get there in one step. If we could get there in one step, I'm sure I would have had a bunch of answers of how to just get there. The problem is that's what we try to do. That's what we try to teach kids to do. In high school, we actively take time to define what is your career going to be. After high school, what are you going to do? And they come up with something. Often they go to school for something. A lot of the time they end up changing that something. How many of you have changed your career since high school? Yeah. Except for you? Technically. Several times, I think, actually, if I remember correctly. Roll it on, Andrew. So here's my thought. The way to get to your ikigai. First step, let's look at each of those 4 things. What you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. Can you name at least one thing for each of those things? That actually doesn't seem that hard. What the world needs? Well, I'm good at fixing machines. That is something that the world needs. Check. I've got that one. What you can be paid for? Well, I won't use the same answer twice. What I can be paid for, I'm pretty good at manual labor. I can shovel after animal waste. So yeah, there you go. That is a need. I can do that. What you're good at? Well, I think I'm pretty good at writing. I can do that. Yeah, okay, got something. What I love? I enjoy public speaking. I enjoy doing this kind of thing that I'm doing right now. So hey, look at that. I've got 4 for 4. I imagine all of us have 4 for 4. That's not that difficult. Ikigai is the difficult part. But once we've got 4, what if we start to narrow it down? What if we go halfway between 1 and 4, 2? Okay, it's not exactly halfway, but close enough. What if we combine that with that? If we were to do that, we've got what the world needs plus what you can be paid for. The word for that is vocation. Vocation. Oh, yeah, no, that was right. I'm not good at spelling while talking. Then what you're good at plus what you love, we call this a passion or a hobby. In principle terms, what these each are is this one, what the world needs plus what you can be paid for, is the thing that you can do to make enough money to stay out of jail. So I'll say hashtag money. What you love plus what you're good at, this is the one that gives you energy. Hashtag energy. This is where people get off. This is where they get off track. Because when people try to go, well, I am an artist, and I want to get paid for my art. And so I'm going to toil and toil until I get paid for my art. And I'm not going to do anything else but my art. I'm going to focus so hard on my art that I will do nothing else. And then they become a starving artist. And so they've got energy and no money. Or people go, you know what? My dad's an engineer. I can make money being an engineer. I really like engineering, but I can do it. I'll be an engineer. So now I have money, and I have no life, and I'm miserable. What often happens at that point is, well, get married and have kids. Doesn't work out so well. My advice, what I did, and I didn't realize I did this. I didn't do it intentionally. It was a complete accident. So I'm giving this to you so you can do it intentionally, is I defined what gives me energy, what I can do to make money. I've already established I'm pretty good at fixing machines. That also happens to be something I can get paid for. So my vocation for a long time has been maintenance guy. I made a good amount of money doing that. Enough money to stay out of jail at least. And my passion is developing other people. I love teaching people different things so that they can go on to do something cool. I was able to do that. And over time, I started to be able to bridge the gap between those 2 things. So instead of having to bridge a gap between 4 things, I just had to get 2 things together. And so now, for me, I can bridge those 2 things to become a teacher. Convenient. That's an actual profession. However, it's not always that simple. I lucked out. Mine happens to be not that difficult of a profession to get into. It's something that the world desperately needs. There's a shortage of teachers. So what I believe people ought to do is define first these 2 areas. It's easy to define 4. It takes almost no effort take that next step and define your vocation and your passion. Once you do that, once you define that, it's as simple as going, what's something I enjoy doing and what's something I can do to make money that at least won't drain me? It won't make me want to die by the time I get home. The point is, it's a process and it takes time. The good news is we have time. Think about that. We have time. I'm 28 now. I'm 28 now. I've had 28 years to work towards this. Life expectancy right now is somewhere around 90. For women. Yeah, for women. Thank you, Mother. So, what is one thing you can do to make enough money to live? What is one thing you can do to get enough energy to enjoy your life? What is your philosophy of purpose? How long do you think it will take you to get to your purpose? How much time do you have left? What is your purpose?